National divorce or peaceful divorce. Where's this coming from? Would it be good for us? Do we want it? Is there a way to stop it but make things better at the same time? Okay, so peaceful divorce, national divorce is this idea that the United States could peacefully break up in some manner to where essentially the various blue forces and red forces could all be in their own little zones and everyone would be happy because the each side can live the way they want. The blues can play out their Orwellian fantasies in reality, and the right can basically mind its own business. Well, there's a whole bunch of problems with this concept, but let's start with first, where's this coming from? Okay, so it's a term, okay, you can start hearing it appearing in many different places. So, and actually starting to creep on to legacy media. So when things like this start showing up, uh, you have to ask the question, what's driving it? Well, if it's showing up on legacy media, that means it's not peasant talk. It's not your average Joe coming up and going, "Ooh, I have this great idea," and now media is listening to me and saying the same thing I'm saying. Uh, when mainstream media is saying it, it means somewhere, some way, it's approved. So it's either not going to turn out the way you want, or it is alternatively you are starting to hear chatter about fractures appearing in our establishment. Which one? Don't know. But if the establishment is already kind of on board on this, it means if you think you're going to be directing it from your level, you're out of your mind because it won't. So the key is uh, you don't know what game's being played. Either this is something people are threatening for real uh, in order to get the other side to realize just how serious they are, saying, "Hey, you're crossing red lines here, and we need to figure out how to work this out." Or alternately, there's a whole entire game being played. Again, if they're talking about it and you think you're going to somehow direct it to an outcome that you think is good, is ridiculously unlikely. It's kind of like thinking storming the Bastille uh, was a thought the crowd came up with all by themselves, and the result in the end is going to be fantastic. Uh, Talk to the guillotine. So the question is why can't national divorce, peaceful divorce, work in a meaningful way? Well, the first thing you got to deal with is the United States has the largest military on the face of the planet. Okay, there's no way. Okay, number one, can you imagine even the conservatives who are babbling a little bit about this peaceful divorce thing would give up the prestige of having the largest military on the face of the planet? Do you think the left and the right can actually sit down together and go, okay, you guys get this many tanks and you can park them in California, and you guys can have this many F-22s and we're going to put them in Texas and blah, blah, blah? Not going to happen. It's ridiculous. There's no way that discussion is ever going to happen. The only way those assets get split up is through violence. It's never going to happen peacefully. And then nuclear weapons. Forget about those, huh? Uh, you think they're going to let Christie Nome in South Dakota become the fourth largest nuclear power on the planet? Okay, and the thing is even if somehow you could come up with a way of saying, okay, well, let's figure out how to divvy up the nukes. No one's going to just say, "Well, I guess we're just going to pull them all off the missiles, and we're going to disarm all the gravity drop bombs, and they're just going to storm away someplace and we're become a nuclear-free power." No, all those nukes are going to sit exactly where they are now, and they're going to be ready to be fired in 30 minutes time, as they always have been, and someone's going to remain in control of them. And it's not going to be a governor of some state. It's not going to be a faction of the Republicans or a faction of the Democrats or any other little group that thinks it's out there. So you aren't going to have a change in that command structure happen uh, peacefully. It's not going to be discussed. It's not going to be worked out. It's just not going to happen. Um, and then if you even throw out the geography problems, I mean, this whole concept of saying, well, gee, you know, state X here is a red state, so therefore it could break off and join a red bloc. Well, obviously, you should know. Okay, whatever state you're in and you're watching this, you know that the overwhelming chunk of the major big cities are going to be blue. You might have some weird exceptions in your state, but all the big cities are blue, and all the countryside is red. And pretty much the only way you have a red state is that somehow the power in the blue centers hasn't been altered in a way, or excuse me, the blue centers have been altered in a way where they can't dominate the red. How on earth are you going to break up into red and blue spheres peacefully? Okay, you're not going to have a situation where a state is so overwhelmingly uh, on the Republican side or on the Democrat side where they're just like, okay, well, yeah, well, maybe a few exceptions, but overwhelmingly most of the states are split down the center, give or take. So if you do this, let's say somehow, some way, this peaceful divorce occurs, you're going to have the largest mass migration of people in history. You're going to have something occur that's never happened historically, and the end results aren't going to be good. You can't move all those people around where everybody who doesn't like what they see up and take off and head to another area. And that's assuming that, like I said, that somehow people would actually sit down and decide to do this peacefully. They're not. It's not going to happen. Okay. So the question is if we can see this showing up in mainstream media, legacy media, that's an indicator that a game's being played. Like either these are either warning shots or it means something altogether different than what you think. So you should stop hoping that this is going to happen because it's not going to play out the way you want. Uh, the only way that happens is with a massive breakdown of the establishment. And a massive breakdown of the establishment of that kind occurs during something like our Revolutionary War, our Civil War, the French Revolution, the Russian Revolution. And the outcomes of those aren't necessarily good. Even the Revolutionary War ended up centralizing power in the government in the United States in a far greater fashion than it had been when it was remotely governed from Britain. Uh, so some people say, well, if we broke up into little bits and pieces, it'd be a much better place. Well, why would you say that? There's no proof of that. Uh, in fact, historically, it's the larger countries. Not saying that all large countries end up having more liberty, but you typically had the liberty show up either in large countries or in countries under the protection of large countries. So the idea that breaking up into small pieces is an automatic boon for liberty doesn't hold up historically. Uh, One of the problems is when you're a little country and you don't have a patron looking out for you, everyone else comes and screws with you. This is something we've known from the very beginning of our country. Uh, we had foreign intrigue messing around with the United States from its actual birth. The moment we had a functional government, the French were in here basically trying to suck us into a war. And it wasn't just like, oh, well, we talked to a few people. No, they were actively meddling, putting agents in on the ground, stirring people up, uh, buying space in newspapers, and actually split the country down the center, where we came very close to joining uh, the European war against France in a way that probably would have been horrifically bad for our country. Uh, Essentially, if you look at all the meddling the United States does in all the little tiny countries around the world, if suddenly we broke up into multiple pieces, you can guarantee whatever big countries remain are going to do the same thing to us. They're not going to sit there and go, oh, well, geez, we're just going to let you guys go do your thing. We're just going to ignore it. And they're like, oh, no, no. Once you broke up, we're going to make sure you stay broke up. They're going to be screwing with us endlessly. There's going to be no peace. Even if they're not out and out directly invading, I mean, it's going to be a weekly event with some new politician, uh, basically getting caught with a suitcase, full of a million yuan or 10 million rubles or whatever it is that's buying them out, and corruption will just become so commonplace that it'll make us yearn for the good old days of how our system works now. So, is there a solution? Well, yeah, and I did talk about this in another video, and I guess this is beat a dead horse week. So, um, what I believe would be the solution to a lot of the problems we have. Now, where it comes down to is we actually have um, a fairly significant flaw in the Constitution. Um, it's something Madison was kind of trying to fix, but he couldn't at the time. Um, if you've watched some of my other videos, especially about like the American Revolution and other things like that, uh, big issue that was going on in the United States, and it's an issue that's literally never changed since okay, this was happening before we were a country, and it happens right up to this very day. The big problem this country has always had is you've got far-flung rural counties that are answering to a faraway urban center that basically gets into a position where they can say, well, there isn't enough of them out there to change the outcome of our election, so screw them, we don't have to listen to a word they say. And not only don't we have to listen to a word they say, we can abuse them, and we will. And this has been the case in this country ever since the founding, and before, all the way back to Bacon's Rebellion. We've seen this pattern over and over and over again. So one of the things that Madison was trying to do is the Constitution. They're attempting to balance between the national government and state governments. The idea is, and they try to create, there's multiple balancing factors. These are just two. And the idea is the inherent powers of the states would end up being a check against the national government becoming out of control. And one of the things they were throwing in there as a protection was the idea that a state cannot be carved up into other units without the permission of the legislature of the state in question. So, and this was a necessary item in the Constitution because at that point the states looked at themselves as sovereign nations themselves. That's where the term state comes from. That's why we don't call our separate unit provinces, because we aren't little chunks of the main item. These are individual states. They are supposed to be their own little nationalities, and we've only come together under agreement of certain items. For example, national defense and others. So the flaw ends up being is because Madison had to recognize the sovereignty of the states in order to create the balance he wanted, and also in order to even get the Constitution passed. Because if he did not recognize the sovereignty of the states, the Constitution would not have passed. The nationalists did not have enough power amongst the people to create a plebiscite that would have basically vaulted the Constitution over. By maintaining the sovereignty of the states, they are able to buy enough into the people to where they could get the state conventions to push through the Constitution. So, how do we fix this? And the idea I had is essentially to amend the Constitution to allow for individual counties that border other states to leave the state they're in and join up with the other state that they border. And if they have multiple states, they could choose a state. And this doesn't, you have to kind of put more thought process into this to understand why this would be big. It would be absolutely huge. Right now, if you look at a map of California and you look at the frontline counties that are along that border all the other states, it's essentially at least about a third of California. It's a lot. And I'm picking on California because right now they seem to be the most obnoxious of states in terms of ruling like a dictator from their little state capital. But we have other issues where, like I'm sure every state's got its, like Northern California has been talking about joining up with like Southern Oregon. I think they want to call it Jefferson. The Upper Peninsula of Michigan and some of the northern Wisconsin counties wanted to form their own state of Superior and other things like that. And really, that's not workable. And I understand why that's not workable, because you can't have states breaking up in that manner and forming new states, because that is digging into the sovereignty of the state. However, if we give a little bit of sovereignty to a county, you're not running into the same issue unless the state is being egregiously wrong and stupid. So imagine what happens if you create a constitutional amendment where a county can hold a plebiscite, and if more than 66% of the county votes to join the state next door, and the state next door says, yes, we will happily take them. Okay, the mere existence of this power will completely change the way state capitals handle things, because no longer are they going to be able to say, screw them. They're not going to be able to say, we can abuse these poor bastards any way we want, because there's literally nothing they can do about it. They can't sit there and say, well, they're not going to vote for us anyway, and we have enough votes to win, so yeah, we don't care. Pound sand. You know, go cohabitate with your sister and play a banjo. So, once this power is in place, this is going to dramatically change the way the state capitals function. It's going to say, we can't afford to have the counties doing this. So they are going to be listed, they're going to be going to those outlying counties and saying, what's the biggest problem? What are we doing that's making you guys angry? How do we keep you? And any state that refuses to do that risks losing their frontline counties. If those counties start peeling off into other states, that state is going to dramatically lose its power. And if they continue, if they just like double down saying, okay, well, good riddance to the inbred cretins, well, there's now a whole new line of frontline states that can do the same, frontline counties that could do the same thing. Now, here's why that in itself should be very beneficial, because not only is it a safety valve where it's like, okay, a county who's had it just too much can bail, but on the flip side, it's going to force almost every state government, if not every state government, to change the way they do things. Now, this particular instance doesn't mess up the balance between the states and the federal government the same as if you just carved out a whole new state out of a bunch of counties from one state or another, because you're not creating new senators. You're not going in a position where the federal government is doing this for the purpose of like basically like the Democrats pulling the whole DC as a state, garbage, where clearly they don't give a flying crap about whether DC has representation or not. They want two new Democratic senators for life in the Senate out of this. So I think counties being able to peel off and go to another state keeps the balance of power as it is, but at the same time lowers tyranny at the state level. I can't imagine this happening a lot because, like I said, the states are going to have to rethink the way they do things. And if they do not, if they refuse to change the way they're doing things and they lose a couple of counties, very rapidly, they're going to have to rethink how they're doing things. No state wants to become smaller. It's a very valid threat. But the cool thing is it's a valid threat that doesn't do anything to enhance the federal government's power. If a frontline county in California peels off to Nevada, well, the biggest thing that happens is you probably have to use the previous census's data and say, okay, well, this county has this much, California loses this other state gains this. There's no way the federal government can really game that system to their benefit. There's no way the national parties can game that system to their benefit. At worst, yeah, they could try to run campaigns and let's say the Republicans ran campaigns in all the frontline counties of California in order to cause them to break up. It's not a sure thing because California has the ability to change the way it's doing things to prevent that from happening. The moment they see it happening, they have the ability of stepping in saying, okay, yeah, County X is in a lot of trouble here. We need to basically send out, some peacemakers and figure out how to negotiate with them and say, okay, what is it you need to stop this plebiscite? Okay, so I think I covered what I wanted to do in there. Please like this. If you have comments on this, please do comment. I think you'll notice that I do try to answer everybody who comments on me. And obviously, if you think what I'm saying is of interest to somebody else, share it with them. Don't have to be a subscriber to enjoy my content. And hopefully, if you're a subscriber, you are. All right, well, thank you for spending time with me this evening. I hope to see you in a future video very soon.